Hi, everybody, and welcome to the podcast Three.One.All. Here, we're taking three of the brightest minds in the club space. We're asking them one question, and we can all benefit from their wisdom. And it is my honor to introduce three gentlemen that really need no introduction because they are legends in the club management space. I know you guys are not comfortable with that, but it is true. Between the three of you, you practically have a century of club leadership combined at some of the most incredible places on the planet. And when you think of the thousands of members that you have impacted at some of the locations where you've done it, it is a career that any young club manager who is watching this podcast, if they were starting out their career and they could trade for yours, they would take it in a heartbeat. So for that, and because of that, it is, yes, my honor to introduce Bill Langley, Kevin Vitale, and John Dorman to the podcast. And the one simple question that we have for today is, what advice would you give to another club manager that is retiring? And before you answer that question, I think that in addition to what you guys have built in your careers, what is also incredibly impressive is how you guys are going out on top, right? You're doing it the way that you wanted to do it. And I think that that is, a very, very special component of this. And because you're doing it your way, you've had some time to think about how you wanted to do this, right? And everybody's situation is a little different. So I'll start with you, Kevin, because at Baltusrol, you've planned your retirement plan. You've actually groomed a replacement for the last several years in Phil Wheeler. And so what advice would you have for a club manager who is planning on his retirement?
Well, thank you, George. The first thing is using that word plan. You need to have a plan. This probably won't start off the way you think, but you have to go out a decade. And really, that's building your retirement plan with the club. Uh, for club managers to retire, they need to have a retirement plan, a financial plan. And so you want to do that while you're still in the prime. And that's a great conversation to have because it allows that conversation of an exit strategy with the leadership of your club and also for you. And it's really more about talking about this is the better way to retire rather than when you're already at that age where it's more of what year are you going to retire. So I'd say that you want to have a plan at least a decade out of having that financial plan. The second thing, you have to come to terms with it. You have to come to terms with its time. And this industry gives you a timetable. When you hit your 60s, they're talking about you. And they're talking about what's the next steps, how to do this. You want to get ahead of that. You want to be part of that strategy. And you want to make it that it's the right way to do it. Because you've already had the plan, so you know it's coming for that. This can be done several different ways. You have to read your board. At that point, what are they really discussing with you? You have to have that. And one of the best ways to do that is you have to have a mentor that's on that board that can go into your office and say, Kevin, here's how I advise you to do this. Or Bill, here's how I advise you to do it. Or John, here's how I advise you to do it for that. Um, and once you have that established, do that exit strategy. Come up with the date. Because at that point, everything else stops. If everybody knows what that ending date is, it's much more of a less stressful environment. And in my case, I did do that over decade retirement plan. I did my last contract saying this is a 4-year last contract. And then it just happened that I had a brilliant person working for me that we decided that it would be a great idea if he followed. Now, don't get me wrong, he had to do a lot of things to make sure that happened. But for Straw, look at I'm the third general manager in 68 years. That's what this club is all about. That's what the environment's all about. So it's still tough. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure we all have our days for that. Uh, but I would say that you need to have that plan. You need to develop it early, and you need to be part of that process.
Yep. Wow. And I think our viewing audience, when you said 10 years, is probably saying, whoa, I've got some work to do, right? Yeah, very interesting and great information. So, Bill, tell us about, what advice you would have for another club manager that's planning their retirement.
Well, thank you, George. I probably did not go out 10 years. Maybe I should have. Uh, I was more like 5 when I began to talk to my then president about what that may look like. And then, as you know, we all went through COVID and everything that came with that, and then projects that came with it. And so you end up staying maybe a little longer than you initially thought. But God, what fun it was to do that. So I'd say the first thing is be strategic. Know when you plan to finish, and begin working on that plan, just like you would your club strategic plan. Discuss the future date with your family, your club confidant friends, and the board. Plan in advance as much as practical. There's an awful lot to do to prepare your club, yourself, and your spouse for retirement, right? Plan together with your board to identify internal candidates if there are any. In our case, there's not. We had a young man that left us a few years ago to take a GM job. He may have had an opportunity had he stayed, but we find ourselves in the position of having to go out and find a replacement. If there's a better time of the year, plan for your time of year of retirement. For us, it's always better to plan it out of the season than it is in the heart of the season because we're so busy down here in Florida. I think you have to be helpful but not interfering and get your team ready for the transition. I think the third thing I'd say is always leave your job better than you found it. That's your legacy, right? I think as you started this, our job is to be better on our last day of the work than we were on our first day. And if there's anything that we can do, and if there's anything that all three of us, I think, can and should be proud of, is that, as you said, we're going out on top. I think it's important to leave a useful roadmap for the new person by organizing your files, decluttering your workspace, developing a specific position transition plan, and assigning key department heads initial responsibilities to aid the new person getting settled into their role. Finally, on a personal note, I think that you have to retire to something instead of away from something. In my case, I plan on retiring to our forever home, where I happen to be now, that we bought a little more than a year ago. We're going to begin chipping away at bucket list trips that my wife and I want to take. I'm going to spend more time with my wife without disrupting her lifestyle, which is going to be a challenge. More time with our daughter and our only grandson. Spend time with my new boat named At Last that is being delivered today. Uh, Find out if I still have a golf game. Say yes to more motorcycle trips with friends. Volunteer for more great causes. Write articles and give back to our industry in any way that I can. And finally, stay involved in my lifelong profession by mentoring others and consulting on club and real estate projects as opportunities occur. At the end of the day, I think we all three want one thing, and that is to stay relevant in an industry that we all love.
Yeah, wow, that is terrific. And for you to talk about the personal aspects like that, because you're right, club life consumes us, right? You were there early, you were there late, you were there on weekends, you were there on holidays. And I love what you said there, Bill, about, you've got to have your own plan because life is going to be very different after you step away from the club, right?
Absolutely. You got to retire to something, not from something.
Yep. So, John, what advice would you
Sure.
have?
Thank you, George. Thanks for having me on. It's good to be here with Kevin and Bill. I really appreciate it. So I did all that, frankly, but I would say if I were to talk about it, I think it's so individual for each club manager to think about their personal circumstances and their relationship with the club while they're planning this next part of their journey. Because often, if you what I've heard are different things. If you tell the club you're thinking of retiring, you're retiring. You're being told you're retiring. So you need to be in the right place in your mind to have that decision made, and you want to be the one that be a part of that decision and think about what happens with you, what happens with your team, how the governance is going to react, how your team is going to react. And I think I did all that, but it is very individual. And you need to read your governance fairly well before you kind of start talking about it, because at sometimes when you want to retire, they decide, yes, it's time to retire you. Um, and for me, it was the decision to retire was really about having a proper ending, because I really believe at some point in our careers, if we're there too long, then you're there too long. And I never wanted to be thrown out or carried out, right? So those are the two things that you worry about, right? Die on the job or get canned, and we don't want to do that. So that was not my plan. I think the three things we talked about are two of the things, and one third thing is certainly finances. Personally, think about how your finances, how you're going to finance your retirement. Can you live the life you want to live after you stop working? And that's a decision that's a plan you need to make well ahead of time, not the last 2 years or so. You need to be thinking about that with all of your savings and how you work with your finances along the way, being prepared to have a lifestyle when you retire. One thing I thought about was a health check, personal health check, making sure that you go through everything to see what's working and what's not working and what you want to do, because you're going to go through a change of life, and having that health check is pretty important. And the future planning, I would say I've not spent enough time on that. As you know, I had my wife passed away just recently, which changed things for me. I thought about future planning, but these past 6 months have been different. So now it's about my future planning. But I do agree with Bill. It's about retiring to something, and my intention is to find out what that something is for me. But I think everybody should be thinking about that, because I think you leave on a note like we are, healthy, financially in a place that's good, and mentally now we want to be prepared to deal with the future, and that really means being relevant in our minds, and whether it be in this business, which I think it would be, but it could be in other walks of life, so that mentally you feel like you're relevant in life. So I think those are the areas that I would give advice on, to anybody thinking about retirement. Key though being understand where your club is with regard to you and retirement, in my mind.
Absolutely.
John, it's interesting you say that. I went to a friend's retirement about 15 years ago, somebody that I consider a legend in this industry. And he was fairly young. He was 63 years old. And I asked him at the end of his celebration, I said, why so young? And he said, sometimes you have to know when to go before you're asked to go. And I just found that interesting. Because from all outward appearances, this guy could have stayed as long as he wanted anywhere.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I think the one big takeaway from this episode and what we've learned is, and the title of this episode is "When a Legend Moves On," right? But you all spoke about planning and how incredibly important it is for you to plan both for your club and for yourself, right? And there's two segments of that planning. So, John, as you're looking for the next thing that you're going to be interested in, maybe Bill will take you for a ride on his new boat, Alas, that is coming. But as it relates to, the impact that you three have had on the club space and probably hundreds of other younger managers, who have learned great things, I think this is another thing that they're going to be able to learn. And look, we all know this day is coming, right? And if we could write the script, we all want to do it our way. And in this case, the three of you, are doing it your way. And that is incredibly, honorable and certainly desirable for the way to go out on top. So I hope that for all club managers and me personally, that I continue to see you at conference. And Bill, when you talked about mentoring other club managers, I think those are ways that will keep you young and keep your mind working, right? And to stay relevant within the space. So yeah, I hope we continue to hear, more of your wisdom, and that's what 3.One.All is all about, right? That this is a short form video-based podcast where we're just trying to tap into some of the brightest minds in the club space and all benefit from their wisdom. And certainly three of you have a body of work that is incredible. You should be very, very proud. I am proud to have called you, both partners and my friend. And I think I speak for the entire industry, on that. So,
George, before you go, let me just say this: bring us back in a year, and and ask us a question about how it worked out for us, because I'm sure we'll have a good answer for you.
yeah, well, I would love that. And I also want to have an episode with your replacements, right? And to see what they have learned. So it's one thing about when a legend moves on. It's also not easy to follow a legend, right? And I think that will be, great advice for a younger club manager for lessons learned. And, Kevin, you're going to have that with Phil. Bill and John, we don't know who your replacement's going to be, but certainly, they're going to be very, very big shoes to fill. It won't be easy, but hopefully, Bill, the planning that you were talking about, right, is going to help that, next club manager. And what you said as well, John. So with that, thank you all for watching. Gentlemen, thank you for your time and participating in this. And again, congratulations on an incredible career.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Bill,
Yes,
Kevin,
Bill.
nice to be with you.
Same to you, John and Kevin.
Thanks for listening to 3.One.All. Don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you tune into your podcasts. Stay connected and in the loop by following us on LinkedIn and Instagram at Pacesetter Technology. And until next time, let's all keep pushing the boundaries of the club space together.